Welcome to the Think Uncommon podcast. This is our special Anzac Day mini series for 2026. I am here today with Adam Blum, the host of Truvu Conversations podcast, who has stood on the hallowed ground of Gallipoli at the 100-year anniversary and has written an autobiography called Easy Target. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks, Joe. It's an honor and a privilege to be here.
Adam, the theme for today is not as much about the uncommon man as it is about the choices that we make and focusing on some of the Anzac history, which I know that you and I both feature as quite prominent in some of the work that we do. I'd like to hear from you about your love for military history and the dedication that you have to helping others. How did you come about doing that?
That's easy, Joe. It all started when I was 6 years old, and I received my grandfather's World War II medals, and I had a fascination from that day that I wanted to know more about his service, and also if I'd had other relatives that had served, and it just started a fascination that led me, as you said, to being at Gallipoli in 2015 and standing at the 100th anniversary of the Anzac Day, 100 years to the day, with my father, and that's how it started. Joe, was really the receiving my grandfather's medals to march in my very first Anzac Day when I was 6 years old.
So that's huge in itself. A 6 year old being given Anzac Day medals to march. You must have marched with somebody else.
I marched with my brother and my dad. So my dad instilled in us that of honoring my grandfather, and also uh, honoring the men and women that have gone before us. And at that point, it was just on 100,000 men and women had made the ultimate sacrifice. It's now gone on to 103,000 men and women have now made the ultimate sacrifice. And yeah, that's what started it. And marching hand in hand as a 6 year old with my dad by my side and my brother by my side. So yeah, that's really what started my passion. And yeah, I've marched. I think the only time I haven't marched or been involved in Anzac Day was when COVID was on.
Is that a core memory for you? 6 year old with your brother and your dad marching for the Anzac Day parade?
Yeah, it's pretty vivid. Anzac Day for me is it's the proudest day to honor my family, and I'm sure we'll get into it later on in the podcast of how many of my family have served, and I have a rich military history and a rich first responder history.
Now's as good a time as any. Talk to me about the military history of the Bloom family.
Well, it all goes back to the Boer War. So I had two great uncles that were killed in the Boer War, and I had 10 relatives on both sides of my family fight in World War One, and also 10 in World War Two. And I also had my military service goes up to the Korean War, and also current day. My dad was called up for Vietnam in conscription, but was medically unfit. And I've actually, in World War One, we had five of my relatives make the ultimate sacrifice, and I've been to every single one of their graves. One, as you said, was at Gallipoli, and four are buried on the Western Front.
That must have been emotional seeing their graves.
Yeah, it really was. You can't explain. You read it in textbooks at school, and you don't, until you walk that ground, you don't understand and you can't fathom the scale of those cemeteries and the loss to families. And when you've got a relative, I've been very blessed that my relatives have graves. There's thousands of families that have a name on a wall or a name on a memorial, like the Menin Gate in Belgium, where 54,000 names to the missing are on those walls. And we've got the national memorial at Villas Bretner where there's 11,000 names to the missing. So we're very lucky. And when I've been over there and walked that ground, I never take it for granted that at least my family, we have a place to go and remember our family. So it's very different for other families who have a name on a wall. That's all they've got. We've actually got a grave to where our relatives are buried.
Yeah, I imagine it makes a significant difference knowing that the person has been laid to rest.
It does. And recently, my last trip in 2022, uh, during COVID, I actually found out that I had another relative on my mum's side. And I was the first in my family going right through our family tree that no one else had been to his grave. And I was the first in 103 years. And I'd never met him, but it really affected me, and I was very emotional. And his story was it was a really he had a daughter that his father wouldn't accept as a he was out of wedlock, and there was actually a bit of battle between the his partner and the daughter and his father. And the army did something that had never ever happened before. They split the medals and the death penny. So for non-military listeners, in World War I, you were actually so if your relative was killed over in fighting in the war, they were actually given what was called a death penny, and it was a brass penny with the name of the dead family member. And what the army did was they split his war medals, and so they gave the death penny and one of the victory medal to his father, and his daughter and his partner got the 1914-15 star and the British War Medal. Sorry, and it had never been done before, and it was just so emotional hearing and learning about his story, and then standing at his grave and honoring him. And he was 28 when he died, and it just made me stop and realize that how short life is. And he was a father, and he answered the call and made the ultimate sacrifice.
Mm. I think that we often don't really consider what the ultimate sacrifice means until we're faced with it.
Yeah, it's something that, as I said, walking those cemeteries, Joe, it is just you just see the names. And back in 2015, I walked at Lone Pine, and there was a generation of graves from 15 to 25. And one of the headstones that I happened to stop on, he was 22 years old. And I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit down the track in when you mention my book and why that age is significant. And for me, I stopped and realized then how precious life is. And I didn't, he went over there for the grand adventure, and he wanted to live, and he died, and he was 22 years old. And it's you just think that 61,000 men made the ultimate sacrifice in World War I. And honestly, a lot of them were naive. They joined up for the grand adventure. And I've spoken to a lot of veterans with my podcast, and yeah, it's not an adventure. It's a horror story.
Yeah, which is why we lead to having so many of our return service men and women, infantry especially, suffering PTSD.
Yeah, it's something that yeah, I'm passionate about. The work that I do now with my podcast is sharing those stories and capturing what it's like to, put your life on the line and risk your life for your country. And also uh, try and understand the mindset that these guys, they risk their lives every day, protecting our freedom that we enjoy. And you can see it now, Joe, where our freedoms are slowly getting eroded away, and that sacrifice. There's a lot of veterans that I've spoken to that are actually now starting to question, was it all worth it? Was that sacrifice away from their families? And the people that have made that ultimate sacrifice, they're now questioning their own service, and it's a question that I ask them often, and the answer is always the same. They always feel that they sit there and think like, and days like Anzac Day and Remembrance Day, it's not, sometimes it's not great for veterans because there's a lot of pain as well with the loss of mates, with if they've transitioned out of the military now, there's that loss. What is the purpose outside of defense, and who are they? And it was the best job. I often hear it all the time. It was the best job they ever had. So there's a lot of Anzac Day. It brings up a lot of emotions for a lot of people.
Yeah, and understandably so. Especially when we're in a time right now where ex-servicemen are handing back their medals and saying that this is not the country that I fought for. I don't want these anymore. They have no value to me.
Yeah, it's a really tough one to I've said to a lot of my veteran mates that don't hand your medals back. Be proud of them. Be proud of your service. You you went away and fought for our country. And although we're in, turbulent times at the moment, it's we are still Australians, and there's still the Australian values. The Australian way is it's hard to see sometimes, but it is still there. It is still there,
Yeah.
and I say to them, wear your medals proudly, march, and be proud, and never forget that uh, you fought for us. And 99% of Australians are grateful for every veteran who has ever pulled on the uniform, whether they've served overseas or they've served at home, for our nation. And we should never ever look down upon our veterans because they do an amazing job and they're away from their families all the time. And yeah, if any veteran watches this, I say wear your medals proudly and march proudly because, yeah, we're all very thankful for what you've done for our nation.
I think that touches on an important point that even though it might seem like so many people have little to no respect for our veterans, it's not really the case, although the times have changed and education is not what it used to be, and the focus on what we've gone through as a country and what our military service men and women have gone through is not as intentional as it used to be in our schooling curriculum. I think it's up to people like our living veterans and people who respect not just the code of the military, but what they stand for, to now more than ever bring attention to what our veterans have provided for us. Even options like you and I sitting together here right now having this conversation may never have existed if people who'd gone before us hadn't decided that they were willing to go and step on a front line and fight for what they thought was absolutely imperative.
I agree, and I think it's something that we learnt, and the contemporary veteran today is amazing in their time and trusting people like myself to record their history, and it's oral history. It's history that we made the mistake too late with with the World War I veterans that it was like they started interviewing them when they were in their 80s and when their memories weren't as sharp as what they used to be when if they were in their 40s or they were in their 60s. And we got better in World War II. Unfortunately, Korea, we really missed that opportunity with the Korean veterans because it was called the Forgotten War, and it was 5 years after World War II, and really it was the forgotten war. That there's not a lot of Korean veterans that have been interviewed. I think I've interviewed one on my podcast, and I'm sure you'll get to it in he's the most famous veteran I've ever recorded, and he's the first and only Korean veteran that I've interviewed. And with the modern day veterans, that they actually want their story told. They actually want to come forward and capture it for history. And unfortunately, with Vietnam, because of what happened and the way that the Vietnam veterans were treated, as I said, I've only had, I think, with Vietnam veterans, I've had two, and I've got three in the pipelines coming up
Mm.
for my podcast. And they ask, well, why do you want to hear our stories? And it's the only way to understand what veterans go through is recording their stories and capturing their stories for history and capturing them forever. So that because if we don't capture their stories, Joe, their stories die with them. And if they are the last soldier in their battalion, the stories of that battalion die with them. So that's
Yeah.
why, the contemporary modern day veteran have been so great in coming forward, and that's why we've captured so much, and we understand more about why they were over in East Timor, why they were over in Iraq, why they were over in Afghanistan, from the contemporary veteran coming forward to share their stories. It makes the general public understand, and because all we ever saw, and I know it growing up, all I ever saw was we only ever saw the negative things out of Afghanistan and Iraq, or
Mm.
another soldier had been killed, another soldier had been wounded. We never actually understood the mission of what they were actually doing over there,
Mm.
and that's where my podcast now has really, I've learned so much about our overall mission, what we were doing, what our special forces were doing. And I bring it back, and it's educational for someone who is a civilian and doesn't understand anything about our military, can
Mm.
put my podcast in and actually learn and be educated.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that we will never know what ever happens in any deployment without speaking to the people that were physically there. Because at the end of the day, all we get told is what the media is willing to show us. And we all know how wide and varied that can be.
Yeah, the media can. I've got friends in the media, but some of them they're very good. The friends in the media that I know. But yeah, you're definitely right. Media can put a spin on a lot of things and tell the narrative that they want to tell, not and go off what will be clickbait and what will sell a story, and
Mm.
not actually have the facts.
Do you ever worry that you may not be able to handle the story that a veteran tells you while you're recording?
Uh I haven't had it happen yet. And I think you've listened to a lot of my podcasts, and I think the biggest thing that separates myself from other podcast hosts is, well, I'm sure the other podcast hosts care, but I genuinely care for their well-being.
Mm.
And although I'm not a veteran, I'm a first responder, and we face similar things, and we face trauma as well. So I can, I can, in one, it's a different lens, but I can understand and sort of relate in a different way, because we go, our fire grounds or our motor vehicle accidents or things we go to, well, that's our battlefield. That's what we go to war every, whenever the pager goes off. So I
Yeah.
think that's where, for me, I can relate from a different lens, and I haven't had it happen yet. So, and what have I recorded? Over 160,
150 almost.
yeah, almost 150 episodes. So, yeah, I haven't had it happen yet, Joe. So who knows? That might be something in the future. And if that does happen, uh, simply I'll just pause, regain and compose myself, and then hit record again. So I think that's the only way that you can and show respect to the veterans.
Which brings me to something that I found absolutely fascinating. I was always of the impression that, podcasts are not generally that long. I've seen plenty of Joe Rogan's podcasts, Sean Ryan's. The big ones get up to around 2 to 3 hours. Sometimes you get to 3.5. Stephen Bartlett, there was a couple of his which were 3.5. And I remember seeing one of your episodes, 6 hours. And the first thing I thought was, how do you sit there for 6 hours, even if you split it, and continue to listen and to maintain the integrity of the experience for not just the listener, but also for the veteran? That must be pretty taxing on you.
Yeah, I've had, I think, about 6 or 7 podcasts now that have gone. 3 have gone into 6 hours, and there's about, I think, 4 or 5 that have gone for about 5 hours or 4 hours. And yeah, it does. I think for me, Joe, because I'm interested and I'm fascinated in the story, which is quite ironic because I had ADD as a kid, and I struggled concentrating at school, and I was bored. And you're right, it is interesting that, I guess for me, it's just I'm interested, and I want to show that respect to the guest, and for them, I feel that it's, in a sense, Joe, it's sort of a non-paid like psychiatrist appointment, really. That's how I look at it. That it's sort of, they're trusting me, and I'm giving them the space to share and things that they've probably never shared. And I had an experience where only a few months ago where I interviewed a veteran, and his wife was there as well, and she has been married to him for 28 years and only has seen him cry 3 times. And in the podcast, he cried 7 times.
Mm.
And all I did was just exactly what you and I are doing now. I just sat and listened to his story. And I just prompted him with a question and then let him tell his story. And if it got too much, I just say, take your time, mate. It's okay. And just be in that moment with him. And so I think, yeah, it does. By the end of it, Joe, you are really tired. Like you feel like you've absolutely done a marathon. And sometimes I do back-to-back interviews on the same day. So when I travel around Australia, and that is hard. That is really hard because by the end of it, you are absolutely you're like a zombie because you're emotionally drained, you're physically drained, and psychologically you're drained as well because you're actively listening, and that's a skill in itself. Is you've got to actively listen to what your guest is saying, and then if they say an interesting point, to go down that path and talk about that. If you don't actively listen, you might miss something.
Speaking of stories, you've had a very interesting catalogue of guests as of recently, the oldest living Victoria Cross recipients, and a couple of other guests who shall remain nameless. I look forward to you releasing those particular episodes. But if I was to ask you, who's the one guest, if you were to pick someone that story just stuck with you?
Oh, now you've put me on the spot. Look, it's hard to break down the 150 odd episodes that I've recorded. I love every story, and I love every guest that's ever trusted me to share their stories. But I think, Joe, I can't break it down to one. I'm actually going to say two. There's two stories. One guest, or actually both of them, are no longer here. So one was a World War II veteran that died actually last year. He was 99, and I interviewed him when he was 96, and he was a lovely old man. David Trist, lovely man, served in Bougainville in World War II. And the second one is my late friend Nick Hill. He was an original 4RR commando, one of the original one of the plank holders of Tag East, and I actually dedicated my autobiography to him. And he was tragically killed in a motorcycle accident over in the US 3 years ago. And he actually opened the door for me for special forces because I tried for, in the first couple of years, I tried to get special force operators on, and they are in a secret world, and that they don't trust media, and we can understand why, Joe, that they don't trust media for what is happening today
Currently,
and
yeah.
currently. So, and I just kept getting the door shut in my face to say no, no, no. And then it was an interview that I did with Cameron Baird, VC MG. His father, Cameron, was
Uh,
posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross.
yeah.
And I happened to see Nick on a page that said he was the bravest soldier that he'd ever fought with. And I reached out to Nick and said, Nick, I'd love to get you on my podcast. I've recently had Doug Baird on, and Doug and Nick were very close because Nick was Cam's CSM, so Company Sergeant Major, and and he listened to the episode that I did with Doug, and he said the care that I showed for Doug, and because it was actually leading up to the 8th anniversary of Cam's death, and it was 8 days from his 40th birthday. And so it was very emotional for Doug. And it was probably the hardest interview I've ever done. It was probably the most nervous I've ever been in a podcast. And it was in the early days of my podcasting career, and I was still learning how to actually interview. And I look back on the first 60 episodes and cringe because they're shocking. But
I'm sure
you
I'll do the
learn,
same.
yeah, you learn, and it's a skill, and you get better. And I think I had a thing the other day where I've now recorded over 500 hours of oral history for veterans and first responders, and you get better as your craft gets better with over 500 hours of recorded
Mm.
history. So, and Nick heard that episode, and he said, "Yes, I'll come on your podcast." And Nick was he was a history buff. He loved the World War I battlefields like I did, and we were talking. He said, "Oh, here we go. I can still hear him now." He said, "Oh, I don't know how this interview is going to go, mate." He said, "Pretty private." And then we started talking about the World War I battlefields, and he said, "Well, I'm going to stop you there." And I've gone, "Oh no!" Straight away, I've said something wrong. But Nick said it where he said, "You're no bullshit." And Nick was he called a spade, and he had no time. He was the only man that could use the F word in 5 words, and four of them were F. And so that was Nick. That was who Nick was. And I was explaining things to him that unless you'd walk that ground, Joe,
Mm.
you can't read that in a history book. You actually have to walk that ground. And from that moment, he opened up to me, and I've got him to thank because he opened the door to a lot of, and he a lot of his mates that he served with came on the podcast because of Nick's say so. So I have him to thank, and so I really narrow it down to those two. But I honestly have to say that every single guest that's ever been on my podcast, it has been an honor and a privilege to have them on. And you mentioned, the oldest living Victoria Cross recipient, Keith Payne. Uh, that took 5 years to get that podcast, and to build the trust with Keith. I'm one of only now four people that's ever recorded Keith's whole story and not just his Victoria Cross action. So we're up there with Ray Martin, who is great mates with Keith. So, and I sort of look to Ray as he's been a mentor in how to interview, and same as Sir Michael Parkinson.
Mm.
I look at those how they interview, and I sort of try and uh, I try to be like them if and I mean I'm never going to be them, but I try and emulate what they do, and because they're both amazing interviewers in their own right.
And you're quite right. They have a certain skill about them, both of those men. I grew up with Ray Martin on 60 Minutes and was definitely one of those kids that used to watch his style. And I always enjoyed how he was able to be confrontational and composed at the same time. And it's such a skill to be able to ask a direct, hard-hitting question in a way where you stay neutral to the response.
Yeah, he's amazing, and it just the respect that the guests show for him, even as you say, when he is controversial, but they still give him the answer and they give him the respect because he's done his homework. And you
Yeah.
have to, Joe. Like it's the same for me. It was the great advice that I got from Senator Jim Molan before his passing, where he said to me, Adam, if you want to get good at this, he said, make sure that you know every single thing about your guest. If they've written a book, read their book. If they've been on other podcasts, listen to their podcasts. If they've written articles,
Yeah.
read them. And I've gone on and done that now. And, I've sat down with Margaret Caneen, senior counsel, and she even says it in her episode where she's like, Ads, you've really done your homework on me. And you have to, Joe. You have to, because otherwise you look like a fool.
Yeah, and I think that there's a certain element of respect that's required to be able to tell somebody else's story. If somebody's willing to give you their time and trust you with their information, and when you're talking to ex-military, this is often quite secretive and never heard before. For the majority of the time, these guys are telling things for the first time ever. So it's not just about earning that respect to be there in the first place. I think it's also about maintaining that respect throughout the course of the conversation and then afterwards. So your guests are not just treated like another number of an episode. It's always about building that relationship post episode. It's never just about the one interaction to get downloads or to be seen for popularity. It's about respecting the person and their story and making sure it's told appropriately and with care.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, Joe, you know a lot of veterans yourself, and a lot of veterans they've got no time for bullshit. So, and they don't suffer fools.
Yeah.
And you, I think every time that they're always guarded with the civilian population because, let's be honest, Joe, they when they join the military, they're a civilian that gets indoctrinated into a military way of thinking,
It's a
and when they
brotherhood, isn't it? I mean, it's a brotherhood. You are in the ultimate gang,
yeah,
and there are rules of engagement both within and also when ordered. And for you to be considered a person that they're willing to speak to, you've met a certain code.
absolutely, and to be trusted, in the special forces,
Mm.
both with the SASR and the Second Commando Regiment, both worlds of East Coast, West Coast. That's taken a lot of hard, it's taken many years to be trusted, and it's something that I don't take lightly because, yeah, reputations take a lifetime to build and a second to destroy.
Mm, absolutely. And we're seeing that play out in the media today in more ways than one.
Yeah, definitely. And, as I'll touch on this, Joe, as well, that veterans, when they leave the military, they never actually really leave the military. They they never fit back into being a civilian. It is not, from what they've done and seen and the way that they do things, they never will be back to just being a civilian. They are a veteran, but they leave with the skills where they're not broken. They have so many skills that they've got to take forward, and what a gift! What a gift it is! Like and it's just reshaping now for veterans what it is when they leave. They haven't lost anything. They've grown a family of, as you said, like brothers, and it's a brotherhood and sisterhood,
Mm.
and the skills that they can take and teach us as civilians. Like, aren't we just blessed that we can learn from this wealth of knowledge that they've got? And, hopefully corporations in civilian world just open the doors and say, yes, we can take you in and teach us all that you've learned, because I'll tell you what, they are pretty amazing when they leave the military.
Absolutely. And it's so unsettling to see so many good men, especially who have gone out and learned the skills that they've learned, come back into civilian life and fall into this perpetual transient identity of, I'm no longer in the military, but I'm also not a civilian. What am I? Where do I fit? And it's so distressing to see how our veterans are treated, how poorly they're treated. And these men are all great and appreciated when they're going out and putting their lives on the line and they're being directed and deployed. But then once their term is over, especially if there's a medical discharge, suddenly everything that they've sacrificed and everything that they've done for the country, it always becomes of no value. And as a result of that, they therefore are treated as if they have no value anymore. And I think that's one of the biggest controversies of military service is that anybody who goes into service goes in with this understanding that if you ever leave the brotherhood for whatever reason, you're thrown into this no man's land. And suddenly you have a yearning to be back into the military, but your body maybe can't handle it anymore, or your mind can't handle it anymore. You're desperate to be back there because it makes sense and it fits you. It's your identity of who you are, but you're thrust into this civilian world where you don't fit. You're around people who don't understand. Your partner doesn't get it, if your partner's even still around anymore. And these people must find themselves asking more often than we think about, what for?
Yeah, yeah, it's across both. I'll put us into it too, Joe, with first responders. It's the same for us. Like, we are exactly the same. If we transition out, it's your identity, Joe. It's what you are. You attach yourself to that identity of being in the military, being a first responder, being a police officer, being, a paramedic, being a firefighter.
Mm.
You attach to that identity, and when it's taken away, there's an old saying, Joe, there's nothing more X than an X. And it's true, because
I've not
that
heard that one before.
yeah, that's really how there's really, like, when you transition, you're no longer part of that brotherhood anymore.
Mm.
You're an ex, you're out. So,
Yeah.
and it's that, and a lot of veterans and first responders find it hard because the organizations keep rolling forward, and
Mm.
you're left behind. Like, it's, see you later, thanks for your service, spit you out, and, chew you up, spit you out. It's very hard, and that's where it's there are a lot of veterans that and first responders that question, was it worth it? Like, should, like, all those years of sacrifice and, serving veterans, serving the nation, and first responders serving the communities, is it all worth it? And only a veteran or first responder themselves can answer that question. They look into their own service, and that's where you need to do a real deep dive into your own service to understand what if it was worth it. And yeah, majority of the time, like, I know a lot of veterans I've spoken to say they would do it again in a heartbeat. Same as, and you come out, Joe, with the traumas that you've seen. You come out the other side, and you would do it again. You would absolutely do it again, because it gives you purpose. That's the whole thing. If you look on service, Joe, and you look what service is, and if we go back to our scripture teachings, what is it? It's being of service. That's what we do. That's who we are as people. And it does, but you don't have to do it you don't have to join the military or be a first responder to be of service. You can feed the homeless. You can, go and volunteer at the local canteen, or go and, serve down at the local soccer club or whatever it is, cadets, whatever it is.
Mm.
It's just a being of service and that purpose. And that is the biggest thing that I found with every veteran, first responder, or anyone in life, Joe. We all need purpose because otherwise you're a rudderless ship that has no rudder. And how do you navigate without a rudder? You can't. So, it's just finding that purpose. And I think for every veteran and first responder, it's harder, I think, to find that purpose that because you've been indoctrinated into those organizations that you are like the organizations will stop if you're not there. And if you're not part of it. And I think it is harder to get purpose again because I guess if you think about it, veterans and first responders, Joe, there's a mission. There's always
Yeah,
a mission.
always a mission.
There's always a mission, right? What are we going to? Right, we're deploying to this mission, or we've got this job where you've got police going to this, or you've got ambulance they need to go to this MVA, or firefighters need to go to a house fire, or so there's a mission. So finding that mission outside of when you're back as a civilian, yeah,
Mm.
it is hard. It is very hard. So, but I think most veterans that they do find ways, and first responders as well. But it is very tough.
Mm, yeah, super interesting when we see our veterans coming back with all these immense skills and no place for them. And one of the greatest things I've seen as of lately, the last probably decade, is veterans deciding on their own, well, we don't need you to create a place for us. We'll do it by ourselves. And thankfully, I've had conversations with quite a few men who have come back from deployment and left the service and said, no, that's fine. I'm going to go and start a business, or I'm going to go and give back to the community this way, or my purpose is now this. And they've used their service in the military and the training that they've gained from their time in the military to then expand those skills elsewhere and do something which then becomes their newest mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, veterans and first responders just seem to have that attitude of, yeah, let's go and make it happen. If we can't like find out the problem, solve the problem,
Mm.
and move forward and keep moving forward. And I think that's where, and but it also has it's a double-edged sword, Joe, because you are indoctrinated in your own way that this is the only way to do it. And sometimes that what works
Is
in the
that a bad thing
military,
though? Is that always a bad
well,
thing?
well, it can be because what works in the military or the first responder world sometimes might not work in
Might not work in civilian life.
in
Right, so the
civilian
rules
life.
might be a little bit different when we're back in the real world.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think you're right. I've found a lot of veterans and first responders that I've interviewed are very quick to find purpose, find the next mission, and keep moving forward. And what that mission is totally up to the individual.
Yeah, completely agree. And I do feel like we have a social responsibility to look after those who have gone before us, not just by demonstrating respect for them on Anzac Day every year and deciding to show up for them as we should, but on every other day of the year to make sure that we are consistent with how we view these people and treat our vets that have gone before us who have served, whether they've been deployed or not. And this is a distinction that I find is common is, well, if you've been in the service and you haven't been deployed, then you're not as useful as somebody who has gone to Afghanistan, served in Iraq, been in East Timor. Oh, mate, you never left the country, so you're really not a soldier. And I've heard that more times than I can count lately, which I don't take too kindly to it when I'm in the rooms where it's said. But I think that there is a lot that we need to re-engage on and really check our own attitudes around this, because the truth of the matter is, as civilians, we have no idea and we are really not qualified to be going and giving our opinions on things that we have no knowledge of.
Well, I'll educate the civilian listener, Joe, that regardless, deployments are luck. Really, if you break it down, you've got to be in the right place at the right time. And, before East Timor, before Iraq, before Afghanistan, there was 30 years where we were a peacetime army. We had like one or two deployments. We had a deployment to Rwanda, which was absolutely terrible. And I tell the
Horrendous.
civilian listener to go and look up
Mm.
Rwanda and the Rwandan genocide. It was absolutely atrocious. A
And if you want
million,
to see a reference to it, there's a Hollywood movie made called Hotel Rwanda, which is actually believed to be pretty darn accurate about what went on.
yeah. And I've been lucky enough to interview one of my friends who was a sergeant over there and has written the book Pure Massacre. Go and read his book, Kevin O'Halloran. I was in tears. It changed his life and the course of his life, and many others who deployed to Rwanda. And there was also Somalia in 1993.
That's where the
And
Black Hawk Down event happened, right?
correct. Yep, correct. So, and also there was Cambodia as well. And so for 30 years, Joe, we didn't have veterans that deployed. And I'll say this to the civilian listener, each veteran that wears the Defence Medal of Australia, there's only 2% of Australians that will ever wear that medal. And they sign the blank check, which could lead to up and be their life. So,
Mm,
regardless of whether they deployed or not, they signed a blank check to say that if called upon and if Australia came under attack, they would bear arms
yeah.
and be willing to give their life uh, in honor, in honor and in the interests of our nation.
Service of
So,
our country. Yeah. And
yeah,
that's exactly why we should never question respect.
exactly,
It should just
exactly.
be given. It is a byproduct of these men and women having made that decision, and it should never be for us to
Yep.
selectively apply.
And you think about it, Joe, when I stand on at the dawn service on Anzac Day each year, I'm not only honoring my five relatives that made the ultimate sacrifice, I'm honoring the 103,000 other families
Mm,
that have lost a loved one, protecting our nation. And you got to think, Joe, that it's 103,000 and we stop on the 25th of April each year for Anzac Day. But for every one of those families that have lost, a loved one of those 103,000, Anzac Day and Remembrance Day is every day for them
yeah.
because they never will see their relative again. And so for them, it's every day that they honor and when we should be honoring the loss of their loved one because it's not just these two special days because those families they live with it every day.
Mm. That's a good point. That's a good point. And then there's us who just decides whether or not we view it as important on any given day. And maybe we'll show up to the Anzac Day dawn service, but if it's raining, then we won't. Or if it's cold, then we won't. Yet these men and women that went before us, they didn't get to choose the rain or the cold or the snow. They signed their lives on the line. And as a result of that, whatever happened, come what may, they have committed. And I think
Yep.
that that's something that's missing for us today, that our level of commitment definitely can be questioned.
Oh, very much, especially from our youth. I will absolutely say that the commitment from our youth, Joe, is it's questionable. I mean, I've seen I've seen some of the youth, and I know your kids are great. Their commitment is unmatched. But I've seen others of the latest generation coming through, and I've got serious doubts when I'm older. That's for sure. Of yeah. It's
Well, I think
yeah,
that that just means it's more up to us to not decide to take our foot off the pedal, and as people who accept the responsibility of setting things straight, that we do exactly that, that we continue to get the messages out that we do, that we continue to encourage the young up and coming generations to explore, to be curious, but also to not shy away from that discipline side of things, like it's something that's not going to benefit them in the long run, but to pursue through the adversity, as I like to say, adversity is too good an experience to waste, so that they can come out the other side and find out who they really are.
yeah, absolutely. And I think the military and even first responder, being a first responder teaches you that there is adversity that you have, and you got to problem solve. And there's there's no, and a lot of the veteran mates that I've interviewed have said, mate, you're crazy. Being a firefighter, running into flames, we'd much rather run at bullets than run into a fire. And I'd say to
I think
them,
you're both a special kind of mad.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I say to them, look, I'd rather run at fire than bullets. So, but that's why you train, Joe, and that's where you mitigate your risk, and that's where I think overcoming adversity. Uh, it's a great point you touch on because the generations today seem to hit a little bit of adversity and stop as like for us, like yourself and me and many others, that we've had to overcome a lot of adversity, and I'm sure you're going to get to it in a little bit with me and the adversities that I've had to overcome. But it builds character, and when you're in the mud or you're in the depths of crap, you really it's character building and you learn a lot about yourself. And I know recently you've done a challenge that was absolutely it tested you to the nth
Mm.
degree, and you came out probably knowing more about yourself than when you went into it.
24 hours, 24 workouts, and on the hour, every hour, we got to hear a hero story. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
And the the most reassuring part about that is that it started off as an idea from one of the guys at the gym, and he just spoke to his little cohort of mates. And then Detective Inspector Warren Lysart, who I've actually interviewed previously on the podcast, and he happened to mention it to me. He says, "Oh, the boys and I are going to do this 24-hour thing." I went, "Oh, what is it?" And he's telling me all about it. I said, "Oh, that sounds awesome." I said, "Good on you. That's great. You're going to do it here at the gym." And he says, "Yeah." I said, "That's fantastic. I love it." He says, "Sort of might get some extra people involved." And I'm like, "Really?" So what do we have to do? And before you know it, six people turns into 36. And we're there at the gym all night and we're supporting one another and we're hearing the stories. And as you know, my gym is run by an ex-commando. So
Yep.
he knew some of those stories. He was familiar with them, as were some of the other people that were actually participating and also reading out the stories that came on the hour every hour. So for us, I'm pretty sure that everybody else that participated in that event, and there were 43 gyms across Australia and New Zealand, the 24-hour Heroes event, I think it would be fair to say that we were unanimous in it was never about us. And subsequently, pretty much everyone at my gym has decided we're going to do it again next year, which is kind of crazy because I think most of us are still a little bit sore. So I think it's like when you have a baby, you forget about the pain. You're just so excited about the child until you're back in it next year. And I'm sure at 3 a.m. this time next year, they're going, "What was I thinking?" But
Yeah.
it's absolutely worth it. It's a small gesture. It's a nothing, but it is something that we can give back as recognition.
Yep. Well, Joe, I know circling back to Gallipoli, when I was there in 2015, it was -4 and it was freezing cold in the cove. And I sat there and I went, I'm freezing, but I went, it's nothing for what the guys were going through 100 years ago at this time, jumping out into freezing water
Yeah.
and going into the unknown of, well, am I going to be alive
And
at
getting
the end
caught
of,
there.
yeah, at the end of the day. And so for me, that was a small sacrifice that I could make
Mm,
to be freezing, and it's the coldest I've ever been, but it was so worth it.
yeah. I think that experience helps us to try and understand what it was like, even though we can only ever really sympathize, not empathize. At least that brings us a little closer to what it might have been like.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And your imagination, you can only imagine the horrors. And
Mm,
yeah, you can see the photos, and
yeah.
your imagination can only take you so far.
Thankfully, that's a blessing in itself, I
Yeah,
think.
definitely. Definitely.
Speaking of such, we talked about young people and what goes on with young people these days. And while I'm not going to go there because that's a completely different topic, and you and I were both young once. You're still young. I don't think I can claim it exactly anymore.
You're still young. You're still young.
You had some pretty interesting experiences, and I don't want to dwell on it because it's not. It's a part of how you became to be here, but it's not your full story. But you found yourself standing in a precarious place. You left your wallet, your car keys, and your phone on the front bonnet of a car, and you were in the Blue Mountains. And it was a day that I know that you've written your book, Easy Target, about your autobiography. But what I'd like to ask you is a simple question, and it's this. If you had had purpose now, if you had had the purpose you have now, back then on the day that you put your items on the front bonnet of the car, do you think that would have been enough to stop you from almost doing what you did?
100%. Yeah. I it's as you said, it's from that experience I've grown into the person I am today. But I think if I had have had that uh purpose back then,
Mm,
and I think to the belief of what I've been able to achieve from that day back then, looking back on hindsight, and hindsight's
mm,
a wonderful thing,
mm,
I don't think I ever would have got there. I think that the purpose that I've got now,
mm.
and I was 22 at that time, and as I referred earlier
How
on in the
many years
podcast,
ago is that?
uh, at 12 years
All right.
ago.
So 12 years, a lot can change.
Yeah, 12 years. I had hair back then. I don't have hair now. Yeah, I mean, I've got facial hair, but I don't have hair on my head. But no, I circle back to that, standing at that grave at Gallipoli, and he was 22 and I was 22. And, as you said, I was seconds away from ending my life. And yeah, I think now with that purpose that I've got,
Mm,
I'm not that scared little boy that I was back then. I've grown into a man with confidence, a man with purpose, and a man with direction. And I didn't have that 12 years ago. And yeah, so looking back now, Joe, no, I wouldn't have ever got there if I had have been where I am today. But it's an experience, and it's made me who I am.
mm. Yeah, it brings me back to what I said before. Adversity is too good an experience to waste.
Very much so, Joe. Very much so. And
You're
yeah,
definitely not looking at it that way when you're in the dark night of the soul.
no, no, not at all. And yeah, there's been a lot of inner work done
Mm,
to get me to where I am today.
mm,
And I often now I'm a keynote speaker, and I do a lot of talks. And there's still days, Joe, where it's not all. I often say that to people. It's not all roses every single day. There are days where you do have down days,
yeah.
and but you know when you're having them, and you've got tools in your toolkit to get yourself to not keep sliding further and further and dwell. And the biggest thing I've learned is how quickly can I bounce from this frequency back to the frequency that I want to be on, where I'm positive and I'm not looking at things negative. And I think it's so important with the inner work that I've done that I used to, and as you know, because I've done a lot of work with you over the last 4 years, is that I think for me, I used to let a lot of outside influences, knock me off my frequency a lot.
Mm,
As I've really worked hard now to sort of silence those outside noises and just really protect my inner peace. And that's the most important thing to me is protecting that inner peace. And the things I've learned from 12 years ago is cutting away the toxic waste garbage that was in my life that
mm.
that no longer serves me. And that's been the biggest thing that I've learned is protecting that inner peace and really cutting away the garbage and the toxic people that I used to surround myself with.
Yeah, yeah. Environment does matter, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, it does. And I think too, having great mentors and the people you talk about environment, it's mentors that are around you that keep you believing in what your purpose is and keep you accountable. And that's the biggest thing, accountability. And it's something that you and I talk about every single day is the 2 millimeter shifts and 2 millimeters, 2 millimeters, and then by the end of the week you're moving mountains. And it's something that I've brought in with you now is doing the dirty reps, doing and that's the difference between, and the biggest thing I've learned is the difference between a successful person and someone who isn't successful is that successful person just did that extra dirty rep, that one more time, that then made them successful, as the person that wasn't successful stopped. And that's the thing, you've just got to keep going. And
Keep going.
it compounds, and then eventually you get to where I got to the other day, Joe, where, and I'll say it on here, where I sat down and recorded my 150th episode with the Governor General of Australia. Like, I never ever thought that I would ever sit down with our Governor General and do a podcast with her. So that, doing the dirty reps and the 2 millimeter shifts every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be a great episode. I'm looking forward to that one coming out. I want to ask you something briefly about service before we look to wrap up. One of the things I've always been fascinated with is post-high school conscription, where we've got essential military service as soon as you leave high school. I know some of the other countries have that as mandatory. I know that in Spain they do it. I know in Greece they do it. I know over in Singapore, sorry, they do it. Men and women in Singapore, I believe. But here in Australia, we don't have mandatory service post-high school. Do you have any particular thoughts on it?
Yeah, I really think they should bring it back. I think yeah, I'm a massive believer in post high school, like compulsory conscription. Absolutely. I think you've only got to look at today's youth, Joe, that I tell you what, if they were put in the military for 12 months, and I don't think that the youth crime would be as out of control as it is, because the military teaches you discipline. Like yeah, you can be a rat bag all you want, but guess what? If you muck up, you're doing
You learn.
you learn. You're doing you get physical punishment, like
Yeah.
drop and give you 50. And but it's not just you, it's your whole section, it's your whole
Yeah.
platoon, it's the whole battalion. And that's when it comes back that eventually the individual's got to look at themselves and go, well, am I being Jack? Yes, I'm being Jack. And eventually their section, platoon, battalion is going to look at them and company and go, this is, hey man, or hey, you know, to a female, like pull your socks up and, like pull your head in, mate, because we're sick and tired of doing this. So yeah, I really think, Joe, that they should definitely look into it and even doing it on a trial basis of having just for 12 months, see what it looks like. And, because you never know. You never know, Joe.
Mm,
They might do their 12 months and then they might go, actually,
might like
yeah,
it.
I'm a different person and I've changed my life and I actually don't want to hang around that, the wrong crowd. And because, what's the other side of it, Joe, is they go into a life of crime and you never win. You never win with
Or at the very
crime.
least, they never live to their full potential because they haven't got people around them to demonstrate to them what their potential can be. Goggins
Exactly.
talks about it all the time, the 40% rule. You think you're done, you're actually only 40% through. But if you don't have the environment around you to push you, to make you realize that you have extra, you're going to give in to your own body and mind and say, that's it, I've had enough, I don't have any more in me.
Yeah.
But thankfully, the ADF has a GAF program where you can physically go there for a year. And I have a friend's son who experienced it recently. He's literally just graduated and he went in knowing nothing, struggling, and just went, I'm just going to do the gap year because it's going to give me some time to think about what I want to do. I'm not even interested in the military, but it's going to give me some experience. So while I work myself out, I'll just literally go and do that. And he encounters the first 8 weeks at Kapuka. He says he was terrified. He says, I was terrified practically every single day. But you look at him as the boy that went in, and 12 months later, a young man left. And that transition to watch that over that 12-month period is, I can see the pride in his parents' faces. He's not going to go into the military, but he has changed and learned skills that he is going to take with him wherever he goes.
Yep. Yep, that's right. And any young person that watches this episode, Joe, I recommend it. Go and if you're unsure and you're looking for, go and do a gap year because the skills that you're going to bring out into the workforce, or go and do a trade. Go and get a trade in the military. Let the military, train you, go and see the world, and you leave after 4 years and look at the experiences. You can go and start your own business at 2022 and like look at the experiences that you've gained. So yeah, I couldn't like, I mean, we won't get into the, how the military are treated on the other end when they come back from service, but yeah, I highly recommend that they definitely look into it. And yeah, I really think they need to look at definitely bringing compulsory conscription back
Military service,
because
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really think we would benefit it dramatically. And I think as a young nation too, Joe, I think especially the younger generation would benefit from, a little bit of discipline because that's what they're missing. They're
Well,
lacking
you look at what
discipline.
China and Russia are doing. They've got no choice. South
Yep.
Korea, they're all straight into service. You don't have a choice. You're a young man, young woman in. We will teach you, you will learn, you will find out what it's like to be disciplined and to recognize what you can do. Not that I necessarily think that their methods are something that we should be adopting in Australia.
Yeah.
But I must admit, you look at some of those young Russian boys and think about what they can do because they've been given the opportunity and told to learn, and they're mind-blowing some of the things that these young boys can do purely because the environment has given them an opportunity to expand past the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, honestly, Joe, I mean, you go back to Gallipoli and we look at, going back to the whole start and when we started this podcast, that, those young men, there was boys that were 15 that lied about their age
Right about their age.
to go and be part of this grand adventure. And they were 15 charging those hills at Gallipoli. And, we're talking about young Australians that are 18
Mm.
that, there was men younger than them 111 years ago that were storming beaches, like, and just to be part of the grand adventure. So, yeah,
Mm.
I think there's a lot to take away, especially for our next generations that, go and be of service. And, as we said, Joe, it doesn't have to be go and join the military. It doesn't have to
Mm.
be become a first responder. Just be a good person and be of service. Really, that's what it
That
is.
is purpose. And that is the greatest purpose that you can have, is always in service of others. And if you look at some of the greatest philosophers of all time, Seneca, Aurelius, Epictetus, they will all say the same thing. The greatest thing that you can find in life is purpose, and that purpose is always found in service of others.
Yep. And give without expecting to receive anything in return.
Yeah.
Because if you give Joe and expect something in return, you're always guaranteed to be disappointed. If you give wholeheartedly without expecting anything in return, when you do get something in return, it is the greatest blessing.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. One final thing before we wrap up. If someone's watching this and they're thinking, well, Anzac's a great thing, and I'll go and do my bit on the 25th of April, and Remembrance Day is somewhere in November, and I'll do the minute's silence, or whatever they make me do. If you could have one word of advice to someone who feels like they're not connected to the Anzac memory, or they don't understand what a digger is, they don't get the services, they're not interested in the military, maybe even anti-military. As a man who's now in his 30s, who has a podcast that came from a young man who almost walked off a cliff, what would you say to someone that's in a position where they're sitting on the fence, not knowing what they want to do, or whether or not this whole Anzac military matters?
I'd say to them, look at your elderly neighbor across the road or down the street, and if you see them, on the 25th of April or the 11th of November, and they've got medals on the left side of their chest, just you don't have to go to a service. You don't have to go to a dawn service. You don't have to go to a march. And I recently spoke to a veteran friend of mine where she said the greatest thing that she does sometimes is she doesn't go to a service, and she'll just garden, and she'll just be in her garden, and just be at peace in her garden, and just is constantly reflecting on the peace that she has and the peace that we have in our beautiful country that we call home, Australia, and
Mm.
honouring those 103,000 men and women that have given us that freedom. I'd say to the people on the fence that if they see, even the modern day contemporary veteran, or, the elderly, there's not many World War II veterans left. And sadly, there's not many Korean veterans left. And we're losing a lot of Vietnam veterans as well. But I'd go up to them and I'd just say, just thank them for their service, and be inquisitive, and ask the question. If you're unsure of what those medals are on the left hand side of their chest, actually ask them the question of, well, what are they, and get educated on what service is, and what sacrifice is, and what Anzac Day is, and what Remembrance Day is. Because Joe, there's a lot of people that walk around here uneducated and do not have, they're not willing to go and get the knowledge to understand what, a certain topic is. So that's what I'd say to anyone on the fence is go and thank our veterans, thank them for their service, and, enjoy the freedom that they have worked so hard to provide us, where we don't have bombs going off in our country.
Yeah.
We're in a relatively safe, we live in a relatively safe country. So go and thank them, and just pause and remember the 103,000 men and women that have made the ultimate sacrifice for Australia.
Yeah, and be a part of continuing on the history as opposed to one of the reasons why it gets lost.
Exactly. Well said, Joe.
Love it. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate your time today. For those of you who have watched this episode, Adam hosts the True Blue Conversations podcast. You can find it on Apple and on Spotify. He is coming up for his 150th episode, and he has just told you that he will be introducing an episode in the future where he is interviewed or has already interviewed our Governor General. If you're interested in military history and genuinely want to hear stories from the men and women who have had boots on the ground, then this is a great place to start. Thank you so much, Adam, and I look forward to seeing you in more of our episodes in the future, but also appreciate you sharing your generous knowledge and your time today.
Thanks, Joe. It's different sitting on the other side of being the host of actually asking the questions. So it's a little bit different, but it's been an honor and privilege. So thank you.